Hi everyone. Just waiting for people to trickle in. Hi everyone. Thank you for joining us for our first Charla. I'm just waiting for more people to trickle in. I'm Alana Hernandez. I'm the Curatorial Fellow at NCASD. So I'll be joined here in just a second with Cognate Collective. Hi everyone. Thank you for joining us. We'll wait a couple minutes for people to trickle in, and then for Cognate to join us. Hi, everybody. Hi. Hi, thank you for joining, everyone, for our first Charla of the Charla series. This is imagined to be conversations between myself and exhibiting artists in Tema Wild Tongue, Art After Chicanismo, which is now on NCASD Digital. So please do go look at the website, which has the show and everything. We're just waiting for Cognate to join us, so we'll just be a couple of minutes. Thank you all for being here. Hi all, hi. We're just waiting for Cognate to join us. For those of you that just joined us, I'm Alana Hernandez. I'm the Curatorial Fellow at NCASD, and we're doing this Charla on the occasion of Tema Wild Tongue. Great, Cognate is here. So we'll get started in just a second. Hi, both. Good morning.
Hello.
How are you?
We're well. Hello, Internet.
I know, everyone. So now that we're all together, we can get started. But I guess before I begin, I want to take a moment to acknowledge that from my office here in Sherman Heights, San Diego, I'm on the traditional territory of the Kumeyaay.
Yeah, as are we. We're happy to be sharing space with Alana and to talk about these issues on Kumeyaay land, and to recognize that they're continued stewards of this land in spite of unending settler colonialism. So that's an important, I think, way that we should begin the conversation.
Absolutely.
Especially also, I think, recognizing the fact that currently they're leading the charge to prevent the desecration of Kumeyaay sacred lands along the border,
Right.
given the fact that there's an effort to build a new tract of border in East County, San Diego. So we also just wanted to recognize that ongoing struggle that Amy is speaking about, and honor, I guess, their leadership and showing us what it means to kind of, stand up and resist in the face of state violence.
Yeah, I think that's super important. Even I think just getting into our conversation. As I mentioned for the first people that joined us early on, this Charla is on the occasion of Tema Wild Tongue, Art After Chicanismo. So this is a collection-based exhibition. So what that means is that all of the works in the show are part of the permanent collection of the museum. And so this exhibition is really looking at this post-Chicano movement, right? So the movement happened in the 60s and 70s, and so this exhibition really takes off in the 80s to today. And it's split up into 5 thematic sections: activism, labor, rescate the Mexicana, and the border. And so I'm thrilled, obviously, to have Cognate here today to speak about their work in relationship to the border. Let me read a quick bio, and then I think we can get into the section of the border. So with me today is Amy Sanchez Arrizaga and Misael Diaz. Since their founding in 2010, they have worked across the U.S.-Mexico border region, highlighting the contested social, physical, and political boundary between the two nations. In doing so, the pair explores how the border itself is a site of intense social and cultural pain. And so in the show, I think when everyone sees ncasd.digital. I keep plugging it in because it's brand new, you guys. It's very exciting. There are sections, right? And like I said, and the border being one of them. And it's a continual kind of bifurcated space that all of us as Mexican Americans have and hold multiple identities, working on either side of the border, and how important that is in regards to especially our place in San Diego, but what that means in regards to this continuing conversations about Chicanismo and what that means. And certainly your work has a lot to do with migration and that sort of cultural pain in regards to the border. So let me show you the work that is part of the exhibition, which is great that we can do this on Instagram Live. So this example, which I'll turn it over to you guys in just a sec. But this is in our collections called Regresa a mí, Come Back to Me from 2018. And it was first shown in Being Here With You from 2018. And so we see this votive structure with candles in the work, which is obviously reminiscent of Catholicism. Certainly these candles are very similar to the ones that my grandma would light with St. Anthony with the prayers on the back. So I wonder if you can speak a little bit about the design of the candles, the votive structure, and certainly on the reverse there is, and we'll get to that, where traditionally a prayer would be, but there is text. So I want to speak about all of that. So I'm going to turn it over to you guys to let us know.
Okay, great. So I think it's important maybe to preface that our work departs from a really intimate experience of being transborder, binational people. So I grew up crossing between Imperial Valley, Mexicali as a kid. Misael grew up between San Diego, Tijuana. And so a lot of the sort of aesthetic decisions and research and sites of inquiry in our practice are really informed by that kind of lived experience of region and of site. And I think thinking through some of those questions that you pose, Alana, of what that means for us and what that means in our communities. And so we come to this form of the 7-day candle, of the votive candle, after doing a series of projects within swap meets and different public markets throughout Baja California and Alta California. So those projects are happening in 2015 and 2016. A few, and then there was a version of that project that then happened at Tijuana in 2017. So it was I think just part of this larger political interest we also had in sort of decentering whiteness and decentering and returning to sort of anti-colonial modes of representing, and also of thinking about a kind of lineage of art history and representation. And so do you want to talk about
I think I'll also add that part of the way that we started working was, and specifically addressing the topic of the border, was to think about the very specific sites of the border, like the concrete points and spaces of the border, specifically the San Isidro Port of Entry. And much of it was really thinking about, again, the kind of specificity, day-to-day lived experience of what the border means for folks that cross it, especially for folks that work at these ports of entries. And increasingly, and in part, due to an invitation to be artist in residence in Grand Central Art Center in Santa Ana, California, we became interested in the ways that the border manifests, not only in those kind of very concrete day-to-day experiences and spaces, but how it manifests even for those who might not reside in such close proximity to the border, in
Right.
communities that are confronting the kind of threat of enforcement, of immigration enforcement, of deportation specifically. So as we were doing work in thinking about market spaces, we were also collaborating with immigrant rights organizations in Santana, like Resilience Orange County, that are doing and were doing deportation defense work. So specifically organizing a documented the undocumented community in Orange County to yeah, to resist the kind of efforts of the state to separate families and to detain community members. And as we're doing this kind of work in support of their efforts and advocacy, we're also encountering candles that Amy's speaking about in these markets, and one in particular that has the phrase "come back to me," regresa a mí on it. The specific candle that we encountered has a design where it's two, I think it's a man and a woman. The man is kind of coming through the door, and the woman kind of has open arms. So there's this kind of a sense of someone being welcomed home. I think there's a dimension of maybe like a love that has been lost that is returning. But I think because we were doing all this work in relation to deportation defense, to advocating to release people from detention, to prevent, ICE from being able to take people. When we saw that, it registered this kind of this echo or this like resonance with some of that work and some of those efforts to reunite families, to really struggle against the separation of families and the division of families. And I think that became an interesting resonance for us to think about. So the kind of work of political action and political advocacy, and on the other hand, a kind of more spiritual kind of dimension of, yeah, being able to have agency in a world and within structures that are designed in ways that are very oppressive, especially to immigrants and to immigrant communities and to Black, Indigenous, and POC communities. So we became really interested in the ways that votive candles, 7-day candles, I think become this form of, this way for folks to try to harness power in ways that are very kind of tied to the realm of the everyday also, because these are often kind of lit within domestic spaces.
Right.
So there was something about using this object to kind of make a call or a demand for reunification that I think for us felt very powerful, and as Amy was speaking about, very much tied to these other modes of existing and building agency for oneself in kind of deeply oppressive systems. So we kind of went in that direction and wanted to push further in that direction to think about the ways that we might take inspiration from this one particular candle and really highlight and amplify what we saw was already within it, which was a call for reunification and ultimately a call, yeah, to end the kind of structures that are tearing folks apart and tearing communities apart. So yeah, we can maybe get to the specifics of what that looked like and what that meant.
Yeah, so the candle that we created was like sort of a more abstract. So it's like two hands that are reaching across this kind of diagonal line. In English and Spanish, they say regresa a mí, return to me. And could we go to the next slide? And so the other figure that becomes really important to this project and who we sort of invoke as our intercessor in the performative piece, but who I mentioned, you can go back to the previous one, Alana, is Santa Marta. So Santa Marta, whose mythology I think is really interesting because, so like many mythologies of saints in Catholicism as it's practiced in the Americas, Santa Marta is this really interesting syncretic saint who incorporates, or who is kind of this saint that is celebrated, and that is like this kind of intercessor who, so I'll start maybe with the Catholic mythology, because that like could kind of set the stage. But her mythology is that she is the saint. She is the sister of Lazarus, right? So and she is the one that goes in the Bible and says to Christ, like, hey, like you know, make my brother well. And so she's this kind of like intercessor figure. But also her mythology is that she lives in this town subsequently where there's like this terrible monster, this creature, who is, you know, terrorizing this town. And so she goes to this creature, she goes to this monster, and she, in the story that we read, it was really excellent because it says that she binds it to her girdle. So she sort of like ties this monster up, and she brings it with her, and sort of enables then the townspeople to gather and to defeat, right, to like sort of dismember this ferocious creature. And so for us, she became a really interesting and important figure when we think about how it is that we grapple as communities, as collectives, with these kinds of systemic monsters that we're dealing with. And so in calling upon that intercessor, and I think also triangulating the form of the candle, then with that that sort of like figure, I think we're definitely also thinking about these issues that Misael is speaking about in terms of like not just like the kind of like quotidian individual devotional act of using a candle for power, but then how that gets like collectivized. I think that part is important to think about right now as we are all sort of isolated in our collective because of the kind of health crisis that we're in currently. So that yeah, I think that those are some of the elements. I know that we've spoken for a while, so maybe we should give space for Alana to ask a question.
No, I think this is great. I think you know, certainly we talked about when we talked before, prior to our Instagram live, that we had talked about these systemic monsters, and we'll probably get into this a little bit later, but certainly the systemic issues that have to do that plague the Latinx community is certainly poignant right now, especially with these ongoing movements in support of Black lives, right? That like the systemic monsters here are certainly detention centers, but then there's certainly this ongoing issue of the prison industrial complex, and they're not mutually exclusive. So I wonder if we'll get into that in just a second. I know that's like a loaded question, so let's kind of ponder that. But I know, I guess back to the work, let's talk about, you know, the healing aspects too of your work. I know that there is a performance that had happened as part of being here with you, where all of the candles were ceremonially lit. So I wonder if we can talk about that, and also the importance of the number of the candles, right? There are 131 candles. So yeah, let's chat about that, and then we can get into the macro question. But I guess before we get there, I know people may have questions. There is a Q&A feature below. There's a box that has like a question mark. Feel free to use that feature, and then we'll try to get to those questions at the end.
Okay. Yeah, I think maybe we can address the text on the candle as a way of getting to speaking about the performative, but I think it also, speaking about the text on the candles, starts to address some of the kind of larger systemic issues maybe that we're talking about. So the call on the candles is actually an end to the carceral state. And so the call on the candles and in the performance that we did was to ask people to think about like carcerality in general, and carcerality as it is authoring the state, and as it is like stripping different people of executing their citizenship and agency in different ways. And that was really intentional because I think we definitely think about the ways that the kind of like intersectional oppressions and the way that for instance, like there are Black folks in detention, and while there are also like the kind of I guess like I'm like I got excited and like got ahead of myself, and also Instagram is like I keep reading the things and it's very like distracting. Can you actually take
Yeah,
or
yeah.
like
Yeah, so I think I'll just say that specifically the monster that we were thinking about is the carceral state, right? Like is a system that is actively profiting from the detention and incarceration of people, right? Whether those are immigrant peoples and asylum seeking peoples at the southern border, or whether those are people who have been targeted and criminalized from Black, Indigenous, or POC communities. I think the structures of profiting from and extracting labor and essentially stripping those folks of citizenship and profiting from that is the same, I think, in our mind, right?
Yeah.
So we were very actively thinking about the fact that a call for reunification, a call against the active splintering and separation of families and the division of communities was one that would imbricate not just thinking about folks who are being deported, who are being put in detention, but who are also being incarcerated at insane rates, right? Especially within the Black community and the Latinx community at large. Um, the kind of bar that we see in the front of the candle, I think for us, can be a representation of the border. It can be a representation of a jail cell. It can be the representation of a detention center. It's just this structure that is actively keeping people apart, right? And keeping communities apart. And as you mentioned, Alana, what is usually on the back of a candle is a prayer. What we kind of conceived of as a call to action, right? Or as an invocation of power or intercession on the behalf of those who are seeking relief, who are seeking healing. So the call to action is, as Amy was saying, a call to abolish and to end the carceral state, and to really reframe how it is that we're, like confronting issues that have to do with, people fleeing violence, not with compassion, but with, like what xenophobia and ultimately like hate, right? So I think it became interesting for us to then think about ways of invoking that call collectively, as Amy is saying. So like how we can think about these candles as often being lit as a very personal act, having to do with one's personal life, but also taking the opportunity of presenting these as a series to create a kind of like collective invocation.
Yeah. And the other, so there's so they're bilingual.
Yeah.
So a portion of the candles are have text in English, a portion have text in Spanish, and then there is also on like half of the candles the testimony of a person who was detained at the time, David Ortega, who was detained at the Otay Mesa Detention Center, which is just here in San Diego County. So I think it's also important to, oh yeah, your question around the number of candles. So there are 130 candles because that refers to the kind of like housing unit that is the housing units that are and the way that they're structured within the Otay Mesa Detention Center. So I think specifically, we're also thinking about the really local specificity of enacting that politics in our region. And so during the opening of Being Here With You, we did this invocation. So that's, there you see, so Misael is on the left, and then a museum visitor is holding the candle. So Misael would ask them to light one of those like tapers, that you may receive to transfer the light from this candle to kind of transfer the fire from this candle, which had the two images of Santa Marta, which We didn't speak about at length, but maybe we can talk about it in a bit. And then they would bring that over to me, and then we would light a candle together in toward the kind of abolition that Misael is speaking about. So so there's these two figures of Santa Marta. So the first is this more like traditional like Christian that comes to us from Western kind of Christianity and those practices of Santa Marta. So we see her with her foot on this like monster as we were speaking to it, and she has this book. And then in the second image, which is more, I think, common in Latin America and comes to us, I think, also from a more like African diasporic history and tradition. We have Santa Marta, and she's sort of like holding, she's usually holding a snake. And so she's pictured also kind of like dominating this kind of like reptilian figure, but it's this more like one which is a more Western rendering, and one which is like a more diasporic and Socratic image and version of that saint. And I think like the really important thing to mention, I think the interest for us is we're not like particularly religious people, but I do think that we think about the ways that communities and people historically have executed agency and power. And I think the kind of syncretism that we see around spiritual practices in Latin America is really important as part of that project, in that like in like indigenous people, Black people, people who were being really like terrorized because of those practices, right? They create these kinds of syncretic practices to be able to practice some version of those kinds of traditional practices. So I think for us, that's really the kind of like interest in thinking about what was, and also I think those are practices that get passed down like in families. So I think about like the spiritual practices of like my family that were passed down from my mother, that were passed down from her mother, down all of the grandmothers in a line. So I also think in a kind of like really sort of personal, like the way that spirituality becomes a kind of really personalized thing. I think that kind of aspect of the quotidian is also significant in the way that we were thinking about creating this project, and specifically the way that we were thinking about invoking this figure of Santa Marta.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the only thing I'll add is that part of the interest for us in the structure and the ways in which the candles were displayed is that when you saw them not from the front as you see in this image, but from the side, there's the structure resembles that of a house, like a kind of like very rudimentary children's drawing of a house with a little square and a triangle at the top. And I think that that's very much thinking about what Amy was saying, that at the Otemesa Detention Center, where there's a capacity for up to 1,500 people, they are organized into housing units, what they call housing units of 130 people. So I think for us, there's this really violent language or use of language that's happening, where these clusters of people are being referred to as something like housing, where they're actually being, kept from their homes, kept from their communities. So I think we were kind of shocked when we learned of that sort of like ways in which language is used to kind of sanitize the violence that is happening within those detention centers. And interestingly, we thought like, well, if we're going to depict this kind of housing unit, part of it is also the ability to collectively light that on fire. Like thinking about, again, this call for abolition, this call for the undoing of the systems that are terrorizing our communities. So when it was all lit, and you looked, when all the candles were lit and you looked at the structure from the side, it seemed as though this house was on fire, right? And I think thinking now about the kind of crisis that is happening due to COVID, that kind of urgency of collectively mobilizing against these structures that are enacting violence seems even more urgent to some extent.
Right.
I think part of what we were also interested in doing in inviting folks to light the structure with us is really the call was one to really think about how it is that on a personal individual scale you could like take on the mission, take on the role of being an agent of the undoing of these structures, like being an agent of bringing about abolition of the carceral state. So we were actively kind of seeking people, like we weren't just, it was like really trying to not necessarily recruit, but to really think about how it is that we bind together, right? Like bind together in terms of tying ourselves together to these missions of, seeking liberation for our communities. And I think that it was, like a really powerful experience for us to see how it is that people were willing to kind of take that on because it was I think we explained that, like in a kind of preface to the performance what it was that we were seeking to do, I think that there was a willingness to really take on and to take from the museum, take from this experience a kind of feeling of responsibility, right? And being tied to then now this mission and this project of abolition.
And the audience and the participants were it was super like intergenerational, and very like, I think it was also really like, there was families who came up and did it together, so there was groups of people, and so I also think that was really powerful. It happened over 2 hours. Misael and I both sort of completely lost scope of time and space in a way that was really interesting and I had never experienced in like making a performance. It was really powerful and quite, I think I have never, and I don't know if it was also just like that moment, but there was also a lot of people who got like very emotional during the process of participating in the lighting. And so that was also, I think, in a lot of our work there are these interactions that are participatory and that are sort of like invitations. And so I think though in this work, this is maybe one of the projects in which during the performance there's this aspect of like sort of emotional labor in public space that was just like a really interesting aspect to contend with too. So that's a bit about the performance. I don't know, are there more questions, or should we, I know that
we can pause for question now. We can. So the question says, what is the reason of the color selection for the candles?
That's thank you for that question, and it just pops up. So
oh, you can see it. That's good.
We can see it this time. We were worried about that. So a couple of things. So we had been looking at sort of different traditions or like and kind of doing research around different kind of symbology or like the how color signifies, and so we were really like taken by blue, which has historically been both this color that signifies like peace and sort of tranquility, but is also this color that in like different spiritual practices also has to do with like clarifying and sort of bringing like clarity to a situation. So I think we were thinking really specifically and intentionally about like, okay, in just like practically speaking, what is like a good color to bring into this candle and the intention around the candle. And so they're white and blue just because white also is like a purifying color, and so as is like black, but the uses of those two are different. So we just like the white with blue just also showed up better, so it was just like more legible, and so legibility of the candles was important. So that's sort of why.
I'll only add that part of what's interesting is also that the corollary to the more, I guess, Christian image of Santa Marta, Marta la Dominadora, is associated also with a water spirit, Mami Wata, that comes from and was very still venerated in West Central and South Africa. And Mami Watts is associated as with the kind of dual power of water in a way, the kind of like ability to create, to sustain life, but also the ability to take life, and the kind of dangers of waterways, how they act as these liminal spaces. So I think there's also an interesting opportunity to think about, for example, the ways in which something like the Rio Grande acts that way for folks crossing the border, but also the way that the Atlantic Ocean, for example, has been like this, this perilous waterway, right? For people who were taken from Africa and enslaved and brought over to the Americas. So Marta la Dominadora is within the kind of more Afro-Latino context associated with this water deity and this water spirit. So I think that also ties into the use of blue within some of the candles, or within the candles on the structure.
Great. I think there's one more question in the chat, and then we'll talk about some projects that you guys have been working on recently. What is it like to watch people walk through the circle you drew?
Oh yeah, so we drew on the ground, we drew a circle in cascarilla, which is like ground up eggshell that gets ground up into almost like a chalk-like substance. And so I think that it was sort of twofold. The first reason was to think about like creating a space and actually like kind of like making a space within which that pledge or that commitment that Misael was speaking about would take place. So to kind of like literally kind of delineate this zone for the performance, and to also create like a sense of being like inside and together as part of the performance. And then the other is just like in a more practical way, because it's a kind of, so cascarilla also kind of is this kind of liminal like tool for thinking about, again, like protection or just it's a kind of like delimiting, but I think protective sort of material. And so I think, I don't know, I think personally, it sort of made me feel good to make that invitation, to invite people to be in this kind of like space of intimacy and proximity, to make that kind of political commitment, and share that time with us, to share that invocation with us. So for me, it was, I think like, I honor and I thank everybody that participated in that.
Yeah, that's great. I think that's a good note to kind of shift to some of your recent projects. I know we talked about that you're continuing to work even in this COVID moment. You have a recent project in July, like early July 4th weekend, right? But let's talk about your Future Echoes project from 2019. And remember, anyone who has questions, we'll try to get to them at the end. We're running a little bit close to out of time, but we'll try to get to your questions soon. But use the Q&A function so we all can see your questions. So this is from your 2019 sound installation. So you want to talk about that?
So maybe we can just like speak quickly, or do you want to talk about this one?
Yeah, so as we mentioned, the Regresa a Mí, Come Back to Me project was thinking specifically about the ways in which immigration detention manifests locally in San Diego. So we started connecting with organizations that were doing advocacy in relation to the Otay Mesa Detention Center. And we've continued to kind of be interested in, yeah, thinking about the ways that these systems manifest within these kind of very specific sites and within these spaces. So we've continued to do work in relation to Otay Mesa, and the most recent, or two of the most recent projects, which are connected. One was last summer. We were invited to be artists in residence as part of the Plus Lab residency program that is
Through Little
organized
Tokyo Service Center.
organized through the Little Tokyo Service Center. And part of what was interesting, and part of our interest in kind of applying for this residency and our excitement when we were accepted and invited to be a part of it is, I think for us, an opportunity to think about the histories of detention and carcerality in relation to immigrant communities in the United States, and specifically how that manifested during World War II when Japanese and Japanese Americans were targeted as, you know, like enemy aliens. I think that was
Right.
like some of the official terminology. There was this kind of xenophobic, racist fear that folks of kind of Japanese descent were going to be disloyal to the United States and were thus kind of labeled and seen as dangerous, rounded up in what essentially became concentration camps throughout the United States. Many of them on the West Coast, and most of the kind of West Coast population of this community were the ones who were kind of targeted. So we became interested in mining some of this history, some of the resonances between this experience of detention and incarceration and the contemporary crisis that we're seeing at the border. And the ways, or one of the ways that this kind of showed up for us in an interesting way was when we saw this photograph from this moment when Japanese folks were initially kind of being targeted for, yeah, like for surveillance and ultimately for detention. One of the first directives was for them to turn in
which included radios. Yeah. Radio and radio as a tool for also authoring community. We were really taken by this image, and that was, oh, actually, is it paused?
Do you want to go?
Can you still
Sorry.
hear us?
Yeah, can you hear me?
No. Yeah.
We can hear you.
Okay.
Okay.
We just can't.
Yeah, I know.
Move.
Apologize, everyone, for glitchiness that is bound to happen as part of this.
Yeah.
That's all right. We can keep chatting.
So when we last summer, and I think it's important to mention that Tokyo Service Center is a really incredible agency that is works. They're based in downtown Los Angeles, and so we were in residency in Little Tokyo for 3 months. And so during that residency, we met another one of the residents who is, or can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. So we began collaborating with Tracy Katsukiriyama, who was another one of the artists who was in residence as part of the Plus Up residency. And so along with Tracy, who was doing a project of looking at the archives of letters from people who were in camps, in the concentration camps, we then started to think about kind of contemporary organizations and contemporary letter writing that was happening around detention at the border, at the U.S.-Mexico border, and the kind of asylum seekers that were arriving in that moment. So I don't know if you are able to go to the next slide, if we will see it, but it should be a letter.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. We are not able to see that, but I hope everybody else is.
Oh no. Okay.
That's okay. But so we embarked on this project where we contacted an organization which I think is now Allies to End Detention. At the time, they were detaining allies who have a letter writing program where folks can gather, write letters, or even become kind of consistent letter writers to people who are in detention. And we were able to have a few of these letter writing sessions, but then also invited folks to do recordings of some of those letters. And so those recordings we played as part of a hyperlocal sound installation that was installed for like it was around 3 weeks in downtown LA last summer. And so people, if they were on the block, the First Street North block in Little Tokyo, were able to listen to those recordings as part of that installation, along with another. So our project included like a series of other audio recordings, and so this was just like a sort of portion. So this collaboration then this summer, and I don't know, Alana, if you're able to show the accompanying images.
Yeah, so this one is like of a map with future echoes,
Great.
And then there's another blue image. That's later.
So Future Echoes is the name of the sound installation, and the letters were part of that. And then this summer, as part of, or do you want to talk about this?
Yeah, so we were contacted by Tracy Kato Kiriyama and invited to kind of remix some of the audio that we had done in collaboration the past summer as part of a contribution that Devin Suno was making to the project In Plain Sight that was organized by Rafa Esparza and Castles, which essentially was typing, sorry, sky typing messages over detention.
What?
Can you hear? Okay, we can hear you.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So I think we lost a little bit of your text. So this image now that everyone can see, this is from In Plain Sight, which was a project by Rafa Esparza that planes kind of drew messages. And so this is the number that you guys are talking about now. Okay.
Yes, and that's so the number and the project is a contribution by Devin Suno, who then invited Tracy, who then invited us and Umi Shu, who was also part of doing these letter recordings, and is another artist. They're based in Los Angeles. So we, Misael was just explaining that we created an audio selection of some of those recordings that we made for In Plain Sight. And so when people call that number, they're able to listen to those recordings and then also leave a message. And so that those planes and that initiative took place over a 4th of July weekend, just earlier this month.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And yes, can you hear? Wait, can you hear?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, great.
Yeah, and the number is still live and active, so you can still call it to listen to some of those recordings, which are recordings of letters that folks have written from Otay Mesa, from inside of the detention center, along with letters that were written by folks in Little Tokyo, letters that were ultimately sent to folks in detention through the organization Allies to End Detention.
Yes.
As well as some other audio that was recorded at protests and events that were happening last summer to kind of showcase solidarity between the Japanese and Japanese American community and the kind of Latinx immigrant community and the various communities that are kind of suffering through the kind of crisis of detention in relation to asylum seeking and to to the border.
Yeah, that's incredible. I think, to go back to even the earlier work, this is all, it just shows your commitment to working on between the border, obviously as people holding multiple identities between this border space, but then also your continued commitment to highlighting these issues, which is great. And I think a great segue to we have a couple minutes left before Instagram kicks us off. So let's answer this one question, or there's two questions now. Let's see if I can make. So yeah, I cut off. So how are you? Let me read it out because it cuts off a bit. How are you continuing to raise awareness about the abolition of detention centers today? Can you all talk about the collaborative aspect? Oh, I guess it just completely cuts off anyway. Ooh.
Okay. Sorry, Chris. Well, but we can begin to address what we can see. It's important, I think, to mention that the way that we were able to get access to the testimony that's on the back of the candles, and have been able to collaborate and to just sort of like be like cognizant of some of the issues that are happening in the detention centers is because of organizations like Detainee Allies, or who we were talking about, who are now Allies to End Detention, but also folks like Freedom for Immigrants, who were able to put us in touch and get the testimony to us. And so they actually have, I'm gonna just, I think I can put it in here. But they have a bond fund that they are currently like fundraising, and that folks are, something is bad is
Can you
happening.
hear us? Oh no.
Oh no, I'm sorry. I don't know what's happening.
Wait,
Oh, I think the camera got
the
switched
camera
around.
Yeah, there.
Okay.
Here, you can keep talking and I'll type in the thing on the other side.
But I just don't know if that's gonna work. Oh man.
Why don't we you can send it to me via DM, and then we can figure out a way to put that out.
I was trying to put it into the chat, but so I think that right now the real urgency is around the fact that folks are being detained, and people are becoming ill, and don't have the proper kind of like medical attention that they need, or so I think there's a lot of urgency around that. And so I think one of the kind of really simple and effective ways that we can help, if we are able to, is by donating to the bond funds, donating to bail funds, and to also, if we're not able to, for economic reasons, I think just like share that information. I think having conversations around abolition is really important. So I think even just like being in dialogue around what that means, those things are just like really important steps that we can take in the kind of quotidian every day.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think even like simple conversations like this conversation, right, is like a first step. It's always just beginning to speak about things and being comfortable speaking about things that has progress, right, and it keeps progress moving. And I think on that note, we should end. So I just want to thank you both so much for your generous time, for speaking so much about your work. A couple of plugs before we leave. Please follow Cognate Collective on Instagram so you can keep up with their projects.
Oh, no.
Make sure you look at mcasd.digital for To Tame a Wild Tongue. And is there any other plugs that I need? Thank you for this is the first of the Charla series. This will happen every third Thursday of the month. And then, yeah, again, please do check out mcasd.digital to stay up on everything. And this live will be on IGTV and on our YouTube and everything like that. So we'll have it forever, which we're very excited about. Well, thank you so much all for your super generous time, and it was really great. Okay, I'm going to sign off now. Thank you.
Family, and internet friends who we don't know.